All right, we're live. It is 12:03, just a little bit after the top of the hour, and just waiting for the arrival of Jordan Foltz. And I know that you're really going to enjoy Jordan's little visit today. He's brilliant, and I can't wait to dive in and start to carve up what's going on in this country and on this planet and in this physical, theoretical dimension and domain. So he'll be here with me for the first hour. And in hour number two, we're going to take a deep dive into, well, about as deep as we can get in about an hour with human design. And I'm going to help you navigate some basic principles with human design, which I think is a really good system. To me, it's not the most complete system. I mean, there's a lot there. And if you even grab sort of the surface details of human design, I think it could be very, very revealing. I'm not sure it completely replaces Western astrology, but I think it's a really good supplement. And so we're going to get into that today, and we're going to talk about the various types on the human design system, and we'll explore that and see if that translates for you in terms of navigating where we are. Okay, looks like Jordan's here. I'm going to bring him in a second. Just let me say hello and greet you guys. We got Steve Mercer, Thor by the door. What's going on, Steve? Ian Barber. There's Natasha, Lisa Marie. Lisa Marie, you got to set something up. Oh. 10 Dragon 14, Ashante Edwards in the house. Laura D, Victoria V, Joe D, Unca K, Lils, Ryan, the introspective woodworker, and D. Bisu shouting at us from across the Atlantic. Welcome, everybody. And let me just bring Jordan in now. Say hello. Hey, Jordan.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Well, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me back on. It's good to be here.
Let me just, if you guys are not familiar with Jordan in his first appearance, there are a lot of people out there that have YouTube channels and, try to broadcast sort of the deeper meaning or, connect dots or sort of expand. Jordan does all three. And I really, and I'm not saying this just because you're on the show. I really feel like you're one of the more important voices of our time. And I say that because you're a bridge. You're a bridge between one generation and another generation. And you're a real iconoclast in terms of your ideas and where you stand in the midst of your peer group. And it's, and I follow your videos and I subscribe to your channel, which is Papi Aesthesia, right? That's your channel?
Aesthesia. So we're used to hearing anesthesia.
That's right.
That's more part of our vocabulary. We don't often hear the word aesthesia, but it's obviously the inversion of anesthesia. So
what's interesting is I plugged in anesthesia and you popped up as aesthesia. So okay. So YouTube actually corrected that.
Yay, YouTube. Thank you. Wow, I'll be there.
Yeah. Anyway, I highly encourage you to subscribe to his channel. He's just a bell-ringing voice of clarity and always raises a conversation and a topic to a whole new level. So thanks for being here, Jordan.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I want to just jump right in. And you've got a 2-part video series now on statolatry.
Yes.
Which, again, and I'll put the links up here for people. Or maybe, Steve, you could drop a couple of links in the chat if you get a chance.
Okay.
So let's talk about statolatry, which isn't really theoretically a word, but it should be. Yeah. It should be a word. Yep. So let's jump in there. And why don't you go ahead and define statolatry for folks?
Well, so it is a series on my channel. And when I first did the first video, it was just reflecting on an experience that I had in my personal life with somebody who's very close to me and reflecting on the people whom I love and people in my community and people who I know, entering a relationship with the state and the government that is religious, can only be described and seen as a religious in nature. And I realized after that experience, this is going to be one of many. I see these things all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and put a number on it. Everyday Statology Part 1. Mm-hmm. And there is Part 2 now. There will be Part 3, Part 4. And basically the idea is just to reflect on everyday interactions that I'm seeing and having and experiencing through my life that are essentially a prism, that are interactions or experiences that happen through the prism of statolatry. So statolatry is actually a concept that was developed by the early fascists, who also developed the concept of totalitarianism. And we use those words today in fairly negative and kind of pejorative ways. Like you hear somebody, rarely do you hear somebody come out and say totalitarianism in today's discourse in a positive way, or like this is something that we should be moving toward. But for Mussolini, it was great. He loved it. And for the early progressives, they looked to Mussolini as kind of a role model, and someone who was paving the path toward big state kind of utopia. And statolatry was maybe getting more into the mystical realms of Hitler, who was kind of an occult devotee of lots of different occult type practices. But the idea being to supplant the state into a Godhead type place in people's psyches and spiritual devotion. So to sort of start edging out religious devotions and religious type sensibilities, or keep the religious sensibilities, but to supplant the Godhead with the state itself. So statolatry in a really succinct definition means worship of the state, nothing more.
Right. What's interesting is that you go back and you look at like the early progressives or the early left, and even going up through like the 70s with a lot of the communist takeovers in South America, it's like they love their strongmen, right? Yeah. They love the Maduros, they love the Mussolinis, they love the guys who can bang the big stick, and yet they've been engaged in the overthrowing of said strongmen, whether it's Ceausescu and now theoretically Trump. That it's a strange kind of selective buddy love, in that realm. And to your point early on, when we first had our first meeting and discussion, you were talking about this idea of this feminine, this like dark feminine energy, yes, which should become the nanny state, right? So now the strong man that the left so embraced and loved, whether it was Mussolini or Stalin, has become replaced by the strong woman. Yes. And so now we have this transference. So we see this title shift now with Trump, right? Who theoretically has his own version of statolatry, by the way. Right. And we see the left going after Trump, and then what they're doing now is they're giving their attention, they're giving their time, their money, whatever, to this duo of Biden Harris, where it's really Harris that they're bringing all this forward with. So I think it's an interesting juxtaposition, going from the strong man to the strong woman. It goes all the way back to your discourse on the nanny state.
Yeah, it is very interesting, isn't it? And I think it's the strong woman or strong feminized man.
Right.
Well, I think it's okay to have. I think it's acceptable to have men who, if you're going to be a man in this cultural political context and be accepted and praised by, say, the mainstream media and kind of the establishment, then you have to capitulate. You have to capitulate outwardly enough and defer to more feminine sensibilities such as protectiveness, safety, dependence, rights being, rather than rights being a protection of your own freedom to self-actualize, which is a more masculine kind of interpretation or definition of rights, but to forward the idea of rights as actually guarantees for dependence on the state. So if men do that, they're accepted by this system. So it's more of a maternal, if you embody more maternal sensibilities and maternal governing sensibilities, sensibilities that would more traditionally be reflected in the home, like what a mother's responsibility was in nurturing the body, not necessarily bringing forth independence or spiritual fortitude, then I think you can be accepted as a man. But it is very interesting, and I don't know how much of it is a when I talk about these things on my videos, it's hard because I walk the line between like conspiracy and just acknowledging what's happening, and sometimes it just seems so perfect that it's like, man, this has to be planned or this has to be intentional. And I sometimes use language that goes down that road, but given that for me, most of that would be speculative, I try to just deal with it in terms of like, this is a pattern that's happening. Right. Let's recognize the pattern. Here's how you can have control. Here's how I can have control over myself and over my destiny, knowing that this is the pattern of what's going on. So, you know, it's interesting. Once you bring fascism and progressivism online, once you bring online the idea or the philosophy that the state should be in charge of essentially everything in somebody's life, including their psyche and their spiritual orientation, which did happen in the early 20th century, even though it was a more patriarchal version then that did venerate masculinity. I mean, Mussolini and Hitler were manly men, so to speak, and the guys in the 60s and 70s you were talking about were as well. But once you bring on the idea that the state should be the provider of everything and everybody should be dependent on it, it's almost like an inevitable outcome that it'll become a more maternal type embodiment or situation, and that feminine sensibilities and females, literally speaking, biologically speaking, would be the ones that would be seen as more credible in that kind of a discourse, you know?
Yep. I'd agree with that. Even in American politics, like the presidency, you would have characters like Ulysses S. Grant, you know, for better or worse, right? I mean, everybody's got warts here. Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, these guys projected images of being strong and rugged and rough riding. And then you have a couple of outliers. You have Herbert Hoover comes in. He's a West Coast intellectual, comes out of Stanford. And then you have Woodrow Wilson, HH and WW, who's an East Coast intellectual. And then they get into the White House and they begin to foment this sea change. And then really what we have is the real pivot is Roosevelt, because Roosevelt is, you know, not even really a biped theoretically, although I'm not sure I completely buy the wheelchair story entirely. But here he is. He's, you know, he's in a wheelchair. You know, he's not somebody who's like his cousin Teddy Roosevelt, you know, going through parks and uphills in Cuba or whatever. Right. So there we have a sea change where all of a sudden now the leadership becomes very, very different. And who does he buddy up with? He buddies up with Stalin at Yalta. And then he buddies up with Churchill, who's another very deficient man, practicing or promoting himself as a, you know, theoretical man of action, which couldn't be further from the truth. So we have the sea change with Roosevelt. Then everything else kind of, you know, morphs out from there. You know, they bring in Truman, who has this one moment of kind of representing that image, and then Kennedy, who I thought was kind of a balance point between the masculine and the feminine. Again, completely flawed. That election was probably thrown as well, by the way. And he gets in, and then that's it. Like now we're off on a completely different path. And here we are with this current president who, for all intents and purposes, kind of embodies the idea that he speaks to the body politic, the vox populi. He's embraced by the deplorables. He's got people like Steve Bannon around him, who wears a freaking army jacket to, you know, work every day. Right. So, and now, you know, here we are. And you brought up a really interesting point, which is if you told your friends, which I think you probably did, maybe on a Facebook post, basically it's like you're going to sign off on all of these things, which are ultimately going to ruin your business. They're going to ruin your economic, you know, capacity to earn money. And not only that, they're going to ruin, I'm not sure you said this part, but they're going to ruin what's going to go on for your children and your children's children. And yet you're going to brace this. You're going to wrap your arms around this thing. And it's like, and you said in a different period of time, if you would have brought that up, people would have said, well, this is nuts. And you're absolutely right. We cannot accept this. But a sea change has occurred. And I wonder if you could talk to that sea change and, you know, how and why you think that happened.
Well, you know, I wish I was a little older so I could reflect on life experience on whether I'm correct in even saying people would or would not sign off on this. Because again, you know, going back to FDR and the New Deal and going back to some of the post-World War I policies of Wilson, there are some pretty big infringements on personal deliberation and human rights and individual liberty then. Whether it was as consensual, I don't know. But the only way that I can explain it again is through this prism of statolatry, because when I can go to somebody, and again, I live in a community that's highly entrepreneurial. You know, people here either move here with their jobs, or they come here and they open a small business, a retail outlet, a restaurant, a bar, a brewery, you know, clothing tailors, you know, like whatever kind of artsy little thing. Those are the folks, hair salons. Those are the folks that have gotten crushed by the mandatory shut down.
That's right.
And it's a very progressive city. And to go to those people, and I've been okay personally, like I'm okay saying selfish things and acting out of a selfish place, and I'll own that when I do. But this personal, this particular stand when it comes to speaking out against the authoritarianism of these shutdowns, really, I see other people getting impacted on a career and monetary lifestyle level more than I do. Mm-hmm. So when I speak to these people, and I say, and again, it's primarily through social media right now, I'll be honest, this is absurd. This is gonna crush the economy. This is authoritarian. This is evil, and it triggers an angry, aggressive, warlike emotional response from those people, from the people that I'm trying to reach out to and say, hey, this sucks. I'm on your side. Like, we should do something about this. This isn't right. They made you shut your business. You put the last 20 years into this. We should do something. And then they start, literally calling me names, making insinuations, insinuating that I'm a narcissist and things like that.
How could they make that connection between?
Well, here's the link that was posted. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, the cognitive dissonance. And this is the narrative that's promoted by the authoritarians too, on a mainstream CNN, MSNBC level. If you're not following the protocol happily with a smile, not just following it, but following it enthusiastically with full belief in religious style devotion, if you're not wearing your mask out enthusiastically and asking your family to do that as well, if you're not enthusiastically in support of a shutdown, then you're acting out of your own narcissistic self-preservation. And there's articles that they promote that forward this narrative. So
somebody somewhere read that and they said, oh, okay, this guy's a narcissist. He's egotistical, he's selfish, he's self-centered. And really what that tract is saying is that you're an individual and they are demonizing you as an individual.
Yeah.
And they're using a lot of language in order to build a case that you are those things. So obviously nobody wants to be the thing that you're being accused of.
Exactly.
So they'll go in the other direction and they'll say they'll huddle up with everybody else who's in their little, pen, and they'll say, okay, well, we're this and we're doing this and we're not that. Right. Thank God we're not that, right?
Yeah. You find the most undesirable characteristics that anybody would ever want to be labeled with, and you find a way to associate independent thinking and resistance to the authoritarianism with those characteristics. So they do this effectively with racists, they do it with white supremacists, they do it with narcissists, they do it with sexist. So nobody wants to be, nobody who's not those things wants to. I can see how somebody could tend toward narcissism and not be aware of it, but it's like, if you're a racist, you probably know you're a racist, or you're a white supremacist. It's like you kind of just things. It's not like, am I really? Can you teach me about this? Oh my God! But
yeah, how can I become let's do a weekend seminar on how to become a white racist, right? Let's do that, right? Yeah. That doesn't happen.
No, but they find ways to associate otherwise completely unrelated lines of thinking and political and social positions with those things. So here's an example. COVID is disproportionately affecting Black communities, right? Black people are getting disproportionately sick and disproportionately dying. So you come up with a statistical reality, you isolate it in space and time, and then you say, therefore, anybody who's resisting the authoritarian measures doesn't care about the effects on the Black community.
That's right. Or the elderly, right? Or the elderly. I've heard that one. Wear the mask for my grandfather. It's like, I don't even know your grandfather. Okay.
And it works. That's the thing. It's a terrifying thing.
Yeah.
I make a post on Facebook, or I say something, or I make a YouTube video, and anybody can find it. I will say I don't promote my YouTube video on my Facebook, because my Facebook is more my physical in this town community, which is primarily, I would say, largely indoctrinated progressive type people. And I don't want it coming back to affect me in my personal life. But it's a terrifying thing that somebody can make that association, and the folks who hear that will not look into it to think for themselves. They'll just say, bad, 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 bad. They said this, therefore he is bad. Right. But going back to the thing about the religious style devotion, when I try to rationalize how somebody could have that reaction to something that to a honestly sticking my neck out into a cage of lions, knowing I'm going to get my head bitten off, but for their benefit to at least throw it out there and say, hey, let's talk about this, guys. This isn't really right, is it? And by the way, if this was somebody who you considered to be an authoritarian fascist, you'd be against it. It's just that he has a Democrat in front of his name, and you're for it because you are part of the club. But the only way that I can think that they would rationally be hostile to that sentiment, which is me trying to stick up for them, is if they had a religious type devotion to that particular governor, to that particular party, to the state. So what they hear is, so I put myself in that place, all right? And I'm a theist, I'm a God, I believe in God, I believe in ultimate truth, I believe in a creator.
Right.
And so I don't bite people's heads off when they don't agree,
right.
But I'm trying to put myself in their place. If somebody comes out and says God or the creator doesn't have the authority to create or didn't create or natural law doesn't exist, I hear that and I'm like, well, that person's pretty wayward. So I'm like, if I transpose that sort of reaction that I might have, which is again more forgiving and sensible, onto a Statolator's kind of framework, they hear from me, your Godhead is impotent. Your Godhead shouldn't have the power to do this. Your Godhead truly isn't a God. And they frizzle out about it. That's where the hostility comes from.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot there. I want to go back just a bit earlier in our conversation to give you a little perspective about FDR. I was not around when FDR was president, obviously, but he was not well liked. There were a lot of people who were very anti-FDR. They knew he was a communist, by the way. And unlike now, where I think it's like 5 companies own all the major media platforms. Yeah. Back then, there were a lot more independent media platforms and sources, local newspapers that were not bought up by Gannett or Hearst or whatever. Yep. And they were publishing articles about FDR as a socialist, as a communist. Yep. And one of the leading opponents of FDR was Charles Lindbergh. And Charles Lindbergh did not want us to get involved in World War II. It was like, we got to stay out of this thing. This is not our war. And then what happened with Charles Lindbergh is that his baby got snatched from him. Charles Lindbergh's child got snatched from him and eventually wound up dead. That's a whole nother story. But that was a signal, right? They were sending a signal that if you speak out against the authority, this could happen to you. Like you could lose your child, right? So Lindbergh, I don't think ever really recovered from that in that incident. But he was not liked, and at the end, and he even knew it. The thing about Roosevelt is he relished the fact that he was not liked, and you can even see that today with these governors and these mayors who know they're not liked, and they relish in it. Like, what are your thoughts on that dynamic?
That's strange. You know, I didn't really know that about FDR. I assumed that freedom-minded, self-governing people would not have liked him. However, he's so unilaterally and uniformly celebrated in all the propaganda and history books, and the way that he's presented monolithically in today's discourse, and even on an academic level, is almost exclusively positive, that it's kind of new to me to hear that there would have been a widespread media or public presentation of him that was negative. So that's interesting. But I think to relish in the fact of not being liked, it has to do with ultimate power. So it has to do with I think it's an egotistical sentiment of like, you don't like this, but I can do it, and what can you do about it?
Right.
Because I have the power, I will, and you can't do anything about it. So there's I think that's honestly what I would call kind of at least a piece of what I describe in my videos as a satanic impulse. And when I say satanic impulse in my videos, it's an impulse to defy. I usually use it in the sense of the impulse that I think we all feel at one time or the other to defy to defy natural order, or to assert ourselves as more important than that which is, or to distinguish ourselves, to upstage God, right? In the most stark way, to upstage God. Because I did this, I am worthy of worship. Because I did this, it is beautiful. Because I did this, it is important, and for no other reason than the fact that I did it, is it important? It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be ingenious. It doesn't have to be helpful. It doesn't have to be creative. It doesn't have to be anything. But because I did it, it's the same thing. When you go back to the mythology of Satan and God, it's like, you know, your creation, you don't honor me, Satan says, you honor man. And so I'm going to rebel against you, and I'm going to mess up this whole creation and do something completely different. And because I did it, I have the power,
Right.
you know, for that reason. It's pathological people also leverage this kind of an impulse when you get somebody who's pathologically manipulative against someone that they admire or that they find beautiful. Probably, I don't know what the situation is with like John Lennon's assassin, but I think it might have been something like that. You probably know when you get people who admire somebody and esteem what they're doing and their creativity or their genius or their just capacity to a high extent, but they themselves lack significantly.
Right.
They don't have any choice if they want to get a piece of it or get a piece of that eternal power. The only choice they have is to gain control over that person who they're admiring or who they have this acknowledgement of their power of, either through killing, captivating. You can do it in a partner. Pathological partnerships go that way, where one partner will just constantly be texting or harassing the other, gaining a psychic kind of enslavement of that person.
Right.
The same impulse is like, I've got you. I've got your attention. I know that you're great. I know that you're beautiful. And because I have your attention and I have the power, and that's all that matters. Right. You know, I think it's probably something similar with these governors. I mean, that's definitely a part of it. I can't say that, you know, my more conspiratorial sensibilities don't come in. And again, it's not anything that I've researched, but I find it highly suspect that there would be such a unanimous approach to dealing with this problem, which is so obviously ineffective, such as shutdowns of the arbitrary shutdowns of this nature, you know, that everybody would start to implement this at the same time and then continue to implement them now, even though you're getting centralized planning bodies like the CDC and like the UN and like WHO coming out and saying shutdowns are going to have a deleterious effect on public health. They're still doing it. It just tells me there's some kind of agreed upon.
Well, so those bodies are playing a very wicked game, right? Because out of one side of their mouth, they'll basically insert some level of reality or some truth. And then out of the other side of the mouth, they will bark the marching orders. And that, I think, is a technique that's used to drive people insane.
Yes.
Because they're looking to this group as an authority. So let's say you and I are going to make a case that, well, these authorities are actually saying that the masks don't work, the lockdowns don't work, social distancing doesn't work, and you bring that to these people. Meanwhile, the same authorities are stepping up the game and saying, we need to do this. And I think that that's a psychological technique. And that's a psychological technique to split the consciousness or split the psyche and split people as well. So I think that's what's going on there. And I don't think you have to be too conspiratorial to understand that behavioralist psychology, industrial psychology, and the emergence of the technocrats are really out in the open now. Sure. Like this whole thing is just a large-scale industrial psychology like game and experiment. And, right. They're gaming it all the time with new metrics, new data, whatever it is. And people don't understand that. People don't understand they're just in a big Skinner box right now.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. You know, it is very out in the open, and these things are incredibly observable if you don't buy into them. You know, I guess when I say conspiratorial, I'm just acknowledging my ignorance about the specifics about what might have gone on in a back room. Right. As far as the power plays and how things are being done, you're correct. It's completely obvious, you know. And I did a video called Sustaining the Virtues of Hard Work and Courage, and it was kind of talking about what you're getting at with this cognitive dissonance piece, or hearing two different pieces of authoritative information that contradict each other, and then having to obey all the same. And what I was kind of recognizing and observing in this video, and what you're observing too, is that this is just one example. That particular having contrasting mandates or contrasting bits of truth and a particular exhortation that you just must do regardless of what the truth is part of a greater cultural kind of manipulation that's going on, which is upending any and all principles, any and all conceptions of truth, any and all conceptions of fixed reality, in exchange for obedience to the party, obedience to the one party, obedience to the agenda. So it's about unity and it's about obedience. And you see that with everything that's going on. Justice is no longer justice. Justice is social justice. There is what you do and how you act and how you behave in the world doesn't matter. It just matters maybe what your ancestors did. And if they were all good, it actually doesn't even matter what your ancestors did. It just matters about your genitals and your skin color. So forget about any credit that you've developed over your character or what you do. This justice is out the window. And now they're even upending the idea of what racism means. Racism is no longer judging somebody based on their skin color, or having presumptions about them or negative opinion about them based on their skin color. Racism is if a given isolated system has disproportionate outcomes based that you can statistically represent on racial lines, and you're participating in that system, then you're racist. So if we can prove that this color of people or this lineage of people is more likely to be XYZ in this isolated system versus these, then everybody who's on top in the system is racist. And that's how the new academics are trying to present racism. So you can't wrap your head around it. The definitions are changing. And it happens with COVID too. Again, like you said, wear a mask. Don't wear a mask. A mask will protect you. A mask won't protect you. Shutdowns help you. Shutdowns don't help you. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. So if you're trying to abide by the mandates, sooner or later, you have no choice but to be shaken loose of your principles and be completely spiritually resigned to even seeking principles out in the first place, because you know they won't last long. You know? Right.
Absolutely. It's like, why go there? Like, why go there? Why plant my flag there? They're just going to change it anyway.
Yes, exactly.
And that's really, for all intents and purposes, an attitude of defeat.
Yes. Yeah.
So that brings up this question, like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this point? I have some ideas around it, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that first.
Well, I trace a lot of this, and I this from our first interview. I spent a lot of time mentoring boys and doing rites of passage with teenage boys, and I think that when I take it back, I think the most core way and the most truthful way and the most lucid way for me to see these kind of things is to break it down to the individual, is to break it down to individual paths of self-actualization and responsibility. And rather than, you can also take a perspective of, again, intentional manipulation from people in power, or collective cycles, which I'd like to talk about too, like generational cycles, which I think about that through that lens.
Oh yeah, we can get into that for sure. Yeah.
But when I look at it from the prism of an individual development and self-actualization, I see that what we used to do cross-culturally and on a universal level was there was a responsibility of a culture and of the parental team to bring children out of their natural inclinations toward laziness and cowardice, toward retreating into protection. We're all lazy and cowardly by nature. We want to retreat from work to preserve calories and not have to exert ourselves too much. And we're more inclined to act cowardly for self-preservation.
Self-preservation, absolutely. Yeah.
So the mandate of a community and parents, particularly with boys, I will say it, was to bring them away from laziness and cowardice into hard work and courage. And the only way that that could be done was to expose them to the dangerous world where they were going to come to terms with the fact that they were mortal, they were going to get wounded, and they were going to die. And they had to confront that, and they actually had to get wounded. And rites of passage was one way that it happened. And I don't think that rites of passage are like the be-all, end-all necessity to cultivate a whole individual. But I do think it's vital and it's very important to provide youth with the opportunity to confront danger and to get a real good sense of their mortality and their vulnerability before they become adults and before they have any power. Yeah. And we inverted the whole damn thing, the whole damn conversation, where it's all about protecting, preventing from hardship, preventing from wounds, preventing from any negative outcome, and even deluding ourselves into there's a pandemic, there's a sickness. This is an act of nature. I mean, talk what you want about the Chinese government. Sicknesses, diseases have been around forever. It's an act of nature. Rather than accepting it as a part of life, we deny that sickness can even exist and project and are creating these systems that deny that. So we are prohibiting everybody from experiencing any sense of personal responsibility when it comes to their own drive for self-preservation. And beyond that, we aren't initiating youth onto a path that integrates courage and hard work into their character. And without that, you inevitably grow people who retreat from challenge, who seek protection, who project the parental dependency onto the state,
Right.
And who consider it an injustice that they should have to endure any hardship, and consider any wound that they might incur or sustain over the course of their life, regardless of the reason for it. They regard that as an injustice that should not be, and then start asking for somebody to do something about it. The traditional way was to understand that life was wounds and you were going to die. And through building strength, resilience, competency, and grit, that was virtue. And there's a whole slew of virtues that are cross-cultural that you find in almost every culture throughout the world. Hard work, courage, discipline, charity, compassion, all kinds of things that all come down to kind of this perseverance to stand up to life and be resilient, and to grow spiritually stronger, psychically stronger, until the day you die, regardless of physicality. And we've inverted the whole thing. And I think that's how we've gotten here. And it's been a slow step-by-step inversion. But it's happened, and it's getting exported. And I think it probably it started obviously in the Western world, and it's slowly getting exported everywhere. But by inverting things psychically and spiritually, you get to a place where you don't even, if you want to talk about like 1984 and Brave New World, right? 1984 is this foisted authoritarian system on people where it's like, it like hurts to endure it.
Right.
Brave New World is consensual.
Right.
People are asking for it. People want more.
Yeah.
People are like, give it to me, mommy, like the authoritarianism. And that's what we've arrived at, is a psychic spiritual reorientation where freedom is slavery. My freedom, my rights are not how much you leave me alone to find my own way and discover my own creativity and actualize it. Freedom is the degree to which outcomes are being guaranteed to me by the government. Justice is no longer justice. Like I just said, everything's inverted, and people ask for it. Your freedom
is an imposition on other people's security, right? Your freedom is an imposition on their security. That too. And they're going to hold on to that. I wanted to break in just for a moment, because you're on a great roll, but I want to add to something, in that while they were essentially protecting and forcing young men into the background, what were they doing with young girls? With young girls, they were turning them into superheroes, and you can do anything, and you can be anything, and oh, aren't you special, and you're just as good as a man. Yep. And so we have this radical sort of shift going on, socially engineered, in my estimation.
Yep.
And moving one group to the back of the bus and the other group to the front of the bus. And the front of the bus now are these global leaders like Angela Merkel, or what's her name in Australia, or New Zealand rather. And we're seeing that now. We're the AOCs of the world. Now they're the ones that are the outspoken ones. They're the ones that are taking on authority. They're the ones that are considered to be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but it's imbalanced. And I'm not saying they can't do that, but it's just completely imbalanced.
Well, yeah. Again, it is imbalanced, and the bus metaphor. I would say they're moving. They're what's happening is that each gender is being manipulated against its more likely affinities.
Right.
Not that there aren't men who would be damn happy to stay at home and raise kids, and there's plenty. I kind of in some ways, I mean, I do that half and half, but and not that there's not women who want to be president, obviously, right. But on a bird's eye basis, and this is, with extensive psychological research that has been done, and sociological demographic research, women and men are different, and not just biologically speaking. I mean, the minds work differently. What they aspire to be, how they want to apply themselves, what they want to do with their lives, what brings them purpose, meaning, and happiness and self-actualization are divergent paths. They're very different paths. And so regardless of who's at the back or the front of the political bus, the game has been to get them out of their natural state, in my sense. And
right.
I talk about this in my videos, the abortion conversation. When you when you start conflating what it means to be an empowered woman with the ability to have a post-birth abortion, you've succeeded in that. When you get people taking to the streets as an act of liberation of their femininity, to have any legal constraints on my ability to abort my child up until the moment of birth is an abomination, is an injustice, then I think you've psychically and spiritually accomplished that on a very wide scale, when the natural bond between a mother and the child is otherwise, when not interfered with and manipulated and engineered, just about the strongest and most absolute reliable thing in the universe, when it comes to life.
Right. Well, I mean, that goes back to this idea of these Satanists who are essentially running the major cities and states, and basically saying, you're going to do what you're told, and we're not going to follow those orders, and we're going to rub your nose in it. Right. It's the same kind of almost dark celebratory affirmation, like, yes, I killed that kid. Right. Yes. Right. I mean, it's like, the whole thing has just been completely alchemized in a very, very dark way. Absolutely. And I think you really you focused in on something that I think is really important, which is the demasculinization of young men who cannot stand up, who have been battered over and over again for whatever kind of theoretically aberrant behavior they have. Maybe they're rambunctious, maybe they're high-spirited, which is what they used to call kids. And then now they're, you've got ADHD, you got ADD, and you got to start taking all these drugs, right? Yeah. And it's an abomination. But what's interesting is that, we started off, we kind of had a little bit of a conversation about this idea of, having a particular skin color, like, having white privilege or whatever it is you want to kind of label that, right? That's transcending now. They're moving away from the white privilege definition and defamation. Now they're moving into the individual. And the individual it transcends skin tone, right? So now it's all about the individual value versus the group value. So we're done with this, okay? And we know that theoretically you guys, chop down a bunch of trees or whatever you claim to do. Well, those are virtues that are not going to be compatible with the world to come. So the things you were talking about, like courage and fortitude and strength and, all the things that really are part of going through life and learning lessons. Yep. Those things have been assigned to one particular group, but at a certain point, we're really hitting that event horizon that those attributes are just going to be directed towards the individual in general.
Yeah. I think I'm partially following what you're saying, Rob, and I'm partially missing what you're saying.
Okay, good. So let's say, for instance, right? Okay, the ideas of being a pioneer and carving out a niche in the world, whatever you want to like assign to a certain group, right? Yeah. Which they could translate into colonialism or whatever kind of bad value.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Right. So it's associated with a particular group.
Right.
Yeah. Where it's headed is beyond the group. It's transcending the group.
Sure.
And it's moving just to this idea of the individual.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of that's based on superstition. I think, first you start with the group because it's very easy to malign our ancestors because our sensibilities and our value systems have changed. So we can all look back and be like, man, like, the way that a lot of the early Americans, maybe not a lot of them, but certain ones behaved toward Indians was atrocious. You single out certain collective atrocious realities in history and then assign these characteristics to it. And then again, it's a false marriage. You're saying because of these characteristics, this happened, rather than, it didn't have anything to do with courage or fortitude or anything that people were slaughtering Indians. They were courageous and and disciplined and all of these virtuous people during that same time who didn't take any part in that. But so it's a false conflation, a false marriage of those things. And like you said, yes, once those characteristics have been fallaciously maligned, it's easy to then transpose them and divorce them from the individual itself. Like, these aren't virtues at all.
Right.
And again,
right. Exactly. These aren't virtues at all. Yep.
Yeah. And, virtues, and we talk about this, I'm getting together another mentoring organization with a friend of mine, but the root of the word virtues is man. It's beer, and that's Latin for man. And so these were specifically qualities that, cross-culturally speaking, or at least in Latin-speaking cultures, when you want to talk about virtues, I don't know how linguistically break down in other cultures. These were the qualities which defined a man, and every culture throughout time has not seen a manhood as a guaranteed state. It's not like, hey, you're born with a penis and you're just growing up to be a man. No, you have to go through certain things. You have to acquire virtues, and you can't just be given them. You have to earn them. And very often you have to earn them through hardship, challenge, and personal transformation and self-actualization. But, there are certain qualities that, statistically speaking, come more common in men than women, and competition is one of those. And it's kind of how men and young men like to hone their skills and hone their capability and hone their understanding of who they are. And females tend to be more cooperative. They tend to be more agreeable, by nature. And again, that's a kind of like an axis that's been studied psychologically speaking. And so when you go to these school systems and when you look at the propaganda that's being given to youth and the qualities that are celebrated and encouraged, cooperation is key among them. And competitiveness is not there at all.
That's right. That's right.
And what do you get? And so that sounds great at face value, right? Yeah, let's cooperate. Let's all cooperate. Let's all be friends. Let's all get together. Let's be unified.
We're in it together. We're in it together, right?
Who are we cooperating with? Once you instill the sole value of cooperation, then you get people saying, "Oh, well, you're not cooperating." Right. I said this, we said that. The collective says this. Don't you want to be unified with us? Why aren't you part of the group? Why aren't you part of the whole? Why aren't you cooperating? The competitive spirit is core. And I think that, beyond just conflating masculinity and femininity and trying to divorce each group from their true nature, let's say, I think there is a particular strategic salience toward, let's say, devaluing masculinity in particular, because I do think that there's certain natural attributes that come with masculinity, which are good checks on tyranny. Now, tyranny is a masculine expression in a lot of ways, but when you have a lot of self-actualized men who are competitive, who are skeptical, who are having a healthfully channeled aggression, tyranny has a harder time taking over in that kind of a situation with men who are in their power than men who are just cooperating and wanting to be part of unity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. We go from tyranny to weirany, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Carl Jung had this idea that I thought was really interesting to grab me when I was, first getting into Jung, is that there is a need to have a kind of these breakthrough moments in one's personal evolution that is very much tied to this idea of a rite of passage. And if the individual or the group or the collective or culture doesn't have that baked in, what happens is that the psyche and the subconscious conspire within the individual to create the conditions for a particular rite of passage. And for me, this happened when I was, I think I was around 20 years old. And I wound up having just this, off the skids weekend from hell that really changed my life. And I look back in that and I realized fairly early on, like not long after, maybe about 2 years after that, when I got into Jung, that was an event that my subconscious had helped assemble in a lot of ways. So I could basically get my life as close to the edge and as close to being demolished as possible, and then have to reassemble those pieces.
Totally.
And so there is that if we don't consciously court these things, or they're not a part of our culture, then they will happen at some point. So I was thinking, well, you were talking about Antifa, and about how it's very dark and very violent, and it's almost as if the Antifa experience has become this public sort of rite of passage in a very dark way for young people, and they may not even understand that, and they don't even understand the danger of it, because in many cases it's been a very controlled environment where they've been allowed to do what they want without any kind of repercussions.
Right.
So I'd love to hear what you think about that, and maybe we can just dovetail into the generational cycles as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I think you're right. I mean, you get these situations where, a lot of these kids think I say kids, I'm 36, they're probably anywhere from 45 to 22 in most cases, the Antifa folks. But you get these kids rampaging through a city with flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails and breaking and burning the system down, and feeling this kind of like Lord of the Flies type rage, empowered through them. And then then the cops come, and one of them gets isolated and arrested. He's in a fetal position, bawling his face off. It's a perfect example of what you're talking about. He was in this kind of like defiant rage of projecting the burning down, projecting the death. But then he got isolated in a moment where he is damn well going to have to transform, because his grandparents and his parents, who probably think it's nice little Johnny back home, are going to see his mugshot. And all this is going through his head, that he's in an identity transfer right now. He's fiercely angry that he's lived such a sheltered life.
Right.
And he's fiercely angry that he's never had any hardship. And therefore, he must scream about all the injustices in the world and pretend that he's the champion against them, because he knows deep down he's been coddled and softened by everything, and he resents it. And that's another thing that happens, the spoiled brat phenomenon, like a parental system or a generation of elders who coddles the hell out of the youngs will breed nothing but resentment among the youth, versus elders who demand respect and say, get it together, sonny, go get a job. No, I'm not going to give you any more allowance. The kid might be mad for a minute, or the generation might be mad for a minute, but ultimately they'll have respect for that older generation. So I think on an individual basis, the Antifa, I think you can see it on an individual and a collective level. Like, collectively speaking, this is the youth burning down the village just to feel the heat, which is a proverb that, that we used in the rites of passage work. If you don't initiate the youth, they'll burn down the village just to feel the heat. But I think on an individual level too, you get coddled. And, I haven't had, I've had my hardships in life, but most of them have come after my youth and after my 20s, just, through enduring life. But I had a pretty sheltered life as well. And I'm a millennial, but you go up without, suburban environment, you're sent to school, all the bills are paid, you never have to get a job, you study something irrelevant, like sociology or gender studies or some kind of weird theory stuff. And then you get out and you're like, okay, I'm here. And there's nothing for you to do, and you feel like the world betrayed you. You're like, I did everything I was supposed to do, and now there's nothing for me. Something's wrong here. And then you rebel. So I think on an individual level too, the Antifa youth, the Antifa youngsters are seeking to be initiated through that hardship, through that confrontation with death, so that they can be renewed and have more purpose and self-actualization, in their lives.
And it only gets worse here on out if we get universal basic income. It will only get worse. It's the worst idea that, and I know a lot of people think Andrew Yang is one of the smartest guys in the room. He's one of the most dangerous guys in the room, if you ask me.
Yeah. It's like, I like to use like a nature metaphor, to help people to think about these things, because, I personally do think that humans are different from the rest of nature, but I think there's enough similarities and enough natural laws that we can make those comparisons and gain a lot of wisdom from it. It's like, why the same people who would advocate that we should have larger wildernesses for animals so that they can live according to their own terms, live according to their own natures, hunt, kill, do what they do, graze, forage, whatever it is that the type of animals do as part of their inalienable natural rights. The same people who see that as a good thing then argue that for humans, it's good to keep us in captivity, keep us within our injections, have guaranteed food, guaranteed income. Basically, they advocate a zoo type situation for humans. They say humans in wilderness in their natural setting, left to their own devices to find and develop their own paths and develop sharpness and virtue through that, is bad. Good with animals. But they would never think it was good to capture animals and put them in a zoo, even if you did guarantee them every shot of vitamin C, every vaccine, food at 8, 12, and 5, whatever it is. So it's a really it's a hypocritical notion to have. And when you look at animals in zoos, when every outcome is completely predictable and guaranteed for them, their souls are defeated, their spirits are defeated. It's a very sad thing. You don't.
I hated going to zoos, like going on like a field trip and stuff. It's like, oh, please.
And that's universal. That's universal basic income for humans.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to the inversion of what freedom and rights are. I would consider my rights a free economy, a free market. Like, let me find a way to interact with my fellow humans from a place of freedom and make my way. And if I make mistakes, I fall on my face, and that's on me. Once that started to be guaranteed, more and more of my soul and my spirit will be killed. And not to mention, obviously, you're expected to have gratitude for it. And then if you question the systems that are feeding you, the narrative is that you don't bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak. It's the Munchausen by proxy phenomenon. You know, we're going to break you, but we're going to bring you plenty of soup. We're going to bring you plenty of soup in a bedpan. So say thank you, right?
Yeah, right. Do you think, let's play out a dark scenario here. Let's say, Biden and Harris take center stage, and they're just, they're in the group. They're in the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab reset group. Okay. And everything we're talking about is part of that reality. Lockdown, vaccinate, UBI. Do you think that any of these individuals who are so aggressively defending their own bondage would at some point wake up and have a what the fuck moment? Do you think they're capable of that?
Some. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Some. I think everybody's got a different threshold, and some people are willing to sell their entire soul, and I think that there was a time, if you were to transport me back to my college days, it's quite possible that I would be a fervent supporter of some of these things that Klaus Schwab is talking about. If it was being promoted as this justice-y kind of thing, and I was in this kind of zeitgeist of college, I might have been part of that. And so for me, I've been shaken loose of these things step by step, because I am committed to truth, and I don't want to be a slave, and I want people to be empowered, and I believe in an ultimate reality. I think that the Trump election shook a lot of people loose. When you get this situation where all of a sudden there's this guy who's, other than being colorful, charismatic, and kind of a shit talker, he's not doing anything policy-wise that's particularly crazy or that should merit this kind of this kind of reaction. So when you see that incongruity, like, okay, so he's trying to get us out of the wars in Iraq, he's wants to be tough on China, tariffs, there's the immigration thing, there's blah blah. When you look at it at face value and then you see the reaction, I think that shook a lot of people loose of, like, the media being something that should be trusted. I think this election will shake some people loose when you see the curve of the lines of the voting. Mm-hmm. I think COVID has shaken a ton of people loose to, again, start notice a ton of people, particularly on the left or in the center, let's call it, who, just believed that Democrats were the party of helping the little guy out. And now all of a sudden they're seeing almost monolithically across the board the Democrat agenda being authoritarianism and mandating, every little aspect of your life. I think that's shaking people loose as well. So I think that people will continue to get shaken loose as far as their consciousness and their awareness of what's going on, as to who's willing to take a stand and say, no, I'm not complying. That's far fewer. That's far fewer people. Yeah. There's a lot more people who can see the problems with what's going on right now, who aren't willing to say anything about it, than we would ever know, because they're not willing to say anything about it. Mm-hmm. Right. And then I think that there's other people who are full-out statolators who, whatever the state does at this point, they'll go along with, as long as they don't have to see anything horrible, as long as they don't have to, like, see anybody get shot or kidnapped, or, like, see any atrocities, that they'll pretend, they'll watch CNN, they'll just go along with it and try to well at night,
Yeah.
And ultimate statolaters. And those folks are out there, for sure.
And I was trying to think about, well, what kind of life would those people have? I mean, it's like, what do you strive for? What do you value? I mean, it seems like a very closed kind of loop, but then it dawned on me that these are the people that would wind up, being the sort of the citizen Stasi, right?
Yeah.
That they would find meaning and value in becoming their own little authority, or a subset of the authority, an appendage of the authority, and that would give them meaning in their life, where otherwise they would have none.
Yes.
Right. So that's I think that's a real. We see this with the pro-mask Karens and how they're willing to sort of stand up for these ridiculous mandates.
Well,
what do you call them? Values or mandates?
Yeah, and going back to the thing about shaking people loose to foundations and principles and values, Rob, it's like even if you had a person who, say, 10 or 12 years ago recognized human rights, recognized the value of the individual, if they subscribe enough to this shaking loose of any principles or values, then they're demoralized to the extent that they might become, but they're more easy prey to such citizen Stasi type situation. You know what I'm saying? So it's like maybe they weren't naturally predisposed toward that, but through the process of unity and obedience, manipulation, when they don't have anything tying them to something higher or purposeful, they become more subject to that. The mask thing is phenomenal. I had an experience, which I described in one of my Statolatry videos, where I was celebrating. It was another social media experience. I was celebrating the Germans who took to the streets to protest the mask mandates, right? And somebody who's very close to me ended up sending me an email that they intended to send to somebody else who's very close to me.
Now, what do you mean by taking to the streets? What did you do?
Oh, I didn't. I was celebrating the Germans.
Oh, you were celebrating the Germans. And how are you celebrating the Germans?
I was just saying, I was linked to an article saying German,
So it was an online kind of,
like,
right.
Look, good for them. They're
right.
Up and saying this didn't happen.
Okay. So somebody, you got an email that was not supposed to go to you.
Correct.
But it got you. Okay. What happened?
So it was basically throwing me under the bus. And this is from someone who's in my close family to someone else who was in my close family, just making fun of me, and also making it seem that through my opposition to mask mandates, and again, I wasn't making any statement about even wearing a mask. I was just making a statement toward the mandates and the authoritarianism. The email was such that I was being framed as the biggest potential threat of infecting the family with COVID. And it became clear that the narrative that was being created in this email was that kind of, if anybody ended up getting COVID, it was likely that I was going to be the one to be implicated, only because I was against a mask mandate.
Right.
The strange thing is this same person, this is the weird part, Robin. This is where the Statolatry comes in. We were hanging out with some people, my family, who did have COVID, right? And then we advised this particular person, like, steer clear of us for a couple of weeks. We were around somebody with COVID. You want to keep your distance. And we could not keep this person. It was hard to keep them away from us. They wanted to come visit. They wanted to come. So when given real-time data of us managing our lives according to responsibility and knowledge and what we know,
right.
That wasn't even part of the criteria to pay attention to. The criteria was what the Godhead said. Did they or did they not? It didn't have to do with anything.
Right.
They were all about coming over for dinner and hanging out. And it's like, we were just exposed to somebody with COVID. Give us a couple of weeks here,
Right.
Like, every day.
Right.
Go out without a mask. It's a whole email thread about how we're crazy devils, So there's no logical measure up. It's the Statolatry system.
Right. And what's interesting is, like, again, it gets back to this idea of the state as the religion, and you without a mask would somehow raise the ire of the state, and COVID, as an extension of the state, would come to you and punish you, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the leap they're making?
That might be the connection. Yeah,
that
I
is
was just
weird.
thinking, yeah, I think that you're onto something there too, and we're seeing that in the media right now. Like XYZ Republican governors have COVID; they should have had a mask mandate.
Yep, never the Democrats or never the progressives. It's always those Republicans. Yeah.
That might be the logic that was happening. That's actually kind of insightful. I'll consider that. It's a karmic thing, or it's a I violated the cosmic law and
you violate the rules of the universe.
Yeah.
Therefore, you shall pay the price.
Yeah.
COVID will find you.
Yeah.
Better watch out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the generational stuff. Is this going to kind of dive or veer off into the fourth turning material? Is that where you're going to go with it, or is that another kind of insight you've had?
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to go to fourth turning.
Okay, because one of the things you brought up with these generational influences, and I'm really, my thing is astrology,
right,
and looking at cycles of Pluto, and they completely dovetail with the fourth turning.
Okay,
and where we are now, both astrologically and in terms of the fourth turning, like we are in the winter. Like we are in the winter phase. This is winter in America. This is Gil Scott-Heron. This is exactly where we are. The three most dominant planets in the horoscope or the zodiac have been Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, all in Capricorn, all representing the winter month of December and January. So both the astrology and the timing of the fourth turning is exactly where we are. And we have these kids who were born in the kind of the winter months. And like yourself, you're a millennial, you're born with Pluto and Scorpio. Most of them are. Then you have the Pluto and Sag kids, you're the Pluto and Capricorn kids. So now we have this generation of children with the outer planets that were born during the winter months. And here we are in the winter of our time, really. So I'm going to throw that out there, and you can jump in with,
I'm curious for a little more insight about that. What makes now the winter, and when was the last time that we were at this place astrologically, collectively?
Okay, so it makes it the winter. If you go back and you look at the latest version of the first turning, which is post World War II, and it is the time of the hero. And this is when America is booming. And then we have these archetypes like John Wayne and Audie Murphy and Gary Cooper, and it's all heroic and everything is good, right? It's all good. Then the second turning happens right around the 1960s. And then that is the time of the artist. And that's when the anti-hero is born, right? So if we look at the first turning as the spring, the second turning is the summer, coincides with, coincidentally, the summer of love, 1967. Gotcha. Values, etc. So then we get to kind of, Reagan, Bush, Bush, right? Now we're in the fall of America.
Yeah.
And that's where the fruits of everything are just dropping, right? Like supply side economics, greed is good, conspicuous consumption, it's gluttony. It's like, okay, we've harvested everything. Let's just consume it now. We'll consume it all. And then what's left after that? Well, what's left after that is the winter, right? So we're in the winter phase. By the way, the fall phase, I think it's the time of the nomad, if I'm not mistaken. And now we're in the time of the sage/the hermit, which is the winter. Now, the Capricorn stuff, Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto in Sagittarius, and Pluto in Scorpio, those are all November, December, and January. So those outer planets, or that outer planet, represents a group of people who are born into this kind of generational wave where their timing is really commensurate with what is happening now. If you go back and you look at a lot of the baby boomers, they were born with Pluto in Leo, which is really vital. And, Leo represents, movie stars and athletes and heroes. So there's this interesting correlation with astrology and the fourth turning. So we're in a time where the seeds of the next turning they're in the ground.
Yes.
And it is fallow. It is really barren. And to try to grow something during a period like this is really difficult. It's very, very difficult. The metaphors, you have to bring it inside. You gotta have like a grow house, or you've got to have, a hot house to actually get anything done. But that has nothing to do with the world. that has more to do with internal structures.
Yeah.
So now we're in a phase. It's a very uncomfortable phase because we've got to get to this next period and this next cycle, which is the new spring of the fourth turning.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. You know, it's funny. My wife's mother is also an astrologer, and when I first was describing this fourth turning kind of template to her, she took note of the fact that Uranus is on about an 88-year cycle, and that it's entering Taurus. Is that correct?
No, it's in Taurus. It's in Taurus. Yeah.
In Taurus. Okay. And so her observation was that every time that Uranus enters Taurus, there's some sort of a very observable shift in the concrete collective reality, economic, political, social, or something like that. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, so you know, the first video that I did after the election was called "Welcome to the Secular Crisis," because I read this book. I believe that they were the generators of the fourth turning.
Strauss and Howe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the book Generations. And so I first read that book, I don't know, probably a decade ago, and I reread it since then. And, you know, so I identified, you know, myself as a millennial at that time, and really kind of started to observe the qualities that I was seeing collectively in my generation with what they would describe as a typical civic generation. And, you know, what's identified as happening consistently based on these generational constellations is that when you get an idealist generation, which are the boomers in elderhood, in beginning elderhood, and when you get a reactive generation, which are the Gen Xers in full power of midlife, and when you get a civic generation, which are the builders of institutions in rising adulthood, and an adaptive generation in early childhood, you get a secular crisis. And like you said, this was exactly where we were at, and maybe Pearl Harbor time. You know, it's every 80 to 88 years this will happen. And so when I first read this, I was like, oh man, so there's going to be something. And things seemed pretty good, pretty okay, and pretty normal when I first read the book. Like they were kind of moving along, and I was like, I wonder what this is going to be. Could it be that we've already had it? Could it be it was September 11th and it came a little early? Could it be that it was the crash of 2008? I kept thinking about it, and I was like, you know, that those things changed society, but they didn't really change stuff. They didn't change stuff on the same lines of the Civil War or World War II. And yeah, and this spring when COVID hit and the shutdowns happened, I was like, okay, here we go. This is it. And we are in the winter of it, and the people in power are, well, there's my generation, the millennials, aren't really in power yet. We're catered to. There's a lot of movement, politically speaking, and in the corporate world that tries to cater to what they think millennial sensibilities are. You got AOC, who's the new kind of like poster child of, I think, what certain ideological kind of vanguards want to see the new political establishment to be, and that's why she's promoted so much. She has her own Netflix puff piece. She's got articles about her. She's, you know, for being a fairly inconsequential, you know, U.S. House of Representatives person who's not, in my opinion, particularly bright. She certainly has a lot of attention lavished on her. But anyway, the two generations that are in power right now are the idealist generation, the boomers, who are very much starting to retire or are already retired, but are still kind of, I think, the founders of our cultural institutions, of our zeitgeist, of the spiritual content that is pretty much comprising our society right now. You know, and the Gen Xers, who were, you know, they were the gritty Axl Rose, Kurt Cobain generation. They were at a point in their lives, in their rising adulthood, where nobody cared about them or paid attention to them. But when they enter midlife, they're at a pretty dominant phase, and they actually hold the keys to a lot of power. And you know, Silicon Valley is Gen X all day long. Totally. And those are the keys to the kingdom right now. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the civic generation. And so when I look at what this spring is going to be, it's really up in the air. I have such a hard time figuring it out, Rob, because on the one hand, what's the cataclysm that's happening? Because at this time, the end of the winter and the start of spring, it's a kind of break with the past. I mean, when you look at World War II, when I look at World War II, or the last time that this happened, you get the GI generation fighting fascism, fighting Hitler, let's say, but kind of adopting fascism into our country. And that started with FDR. Like we were kind of already on this corporatist, statolatrous, fascist path. And did we fight fascism or did we just fight Hitler? And I'm kind of the sensibility that we just fought Hitler and we didn't necessarily fight fascism at all.
Right.
And
I agree with that. Yeah, that's a great distinction.
And that the fascist sensibilities and institutions, let's not say sensibilities, because the sensibilities would have been brought about by the missionary generation, the early 20th century revivalist progressives. That's where they were born. And the GI generation were kind of just the collectivist, cooperative generation who brought about deep state, industrial complex, administrative state, U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Department of Agriculture, FDA, U.S. Department of the Interior, this whole crazy Leviathan fascist thing.
Yeah, let's not forget the CIA as part of that as well.
CIA, right?
Yeah.
Instituted the NSA, right? I mean, instituted this insanely complex behemoth of fascism. So you could say that the civic generation was instituting the sensibilities of the missionary generation, their spiritual revival. And so if my generation, the millennials, are say the institutors and the collectivists of the boomer spiritual fabric, what is that? You know, on the one hand, at face value, you could say that the boomers as a generation were rebelling against conformity and collectivism and institutions and authority. But on the other hand, boomers are pretty collectivist generation as well, just like the millennials are. When you get those dominant generations, the idealist or the civic, they're both pretty collectivist generations. The real individualist generations are the recessive ones, the Gen Xers and the adaptive. And now the silent generation is in elderhood. So anyway, it's perplexing me as to what this is going to look like, because what it could be is progressivism, fascism 2.0. Because I will say it seems like a lot of, and tell me if you get a different sense, it seems like a lot of boomers to me adopted progressivist fascist sensibilities, even though they initially rebelled from them in their, they were Woodstock, music, sex, drugs, rock and roll, but kind of adopted a lot of the fascist sensibilities, big state, big government kind of things, you know? So
here's all you need to know about the boomers.
Yeah.
Okay. In a kind of a nutshell. So they were very, very, very important when it came to things like art and cinema and breaking tradition with certain values. And they were brilliant at that. I mean, you know, a lot of the boomers get a lot of heat, but you know, they created a lot of really interesting art, and it was very experimental. And there was a very, they wanted to kill the king, right? They have Pluto and Leo. So when you have Leo, that's the king, and Pluto is death, right? So it's the generation that has like kind of the first real falling out with the father, you know, Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean. And so the killing of the king isn't really Kennedy. The killing of the king is Nixon. And they actually wind up like achieving that, right? They impeach Nixon, and they literally kill the king, and they symbolically kill their own father. I mean, that's what they do. And they go from this kind of culture of hedonism, excess, and swinging. And it's the first generation that basically you don't have to get married in order to have sex. And with the advent of the pill, guess what? You can just do whatever you want, right? It's free sex. And so they're very different in that way. But then what happens is that they get on top of it and they start to make a lot of money. They had a lot of money to begin with because their parents had some generational wealth. Things were fairly cheap. Right. They start to make a lot of money. And what happens is that they wind up being conservatives. Now, all of a sudden, they want to conserve the gains that they've accumulated. And Reagan found this out. When Reagan was running for office, first term, he was the first president to use what they call psychographics. And psychographics comes out of Stanford Research Institute. And what they did, it was pretty rudimentary. It was all punch cards. And they had these punch cards that they sent out to a bunch of people who were in Reagan's base, the demographic that'd be voting for Reagan, which was not necessarily his age, but younger. And here's what they found out. They found out, number one, they kind of wanted to be left alone, right? They wanted to be left alone. They were not really into corporate values, right? They weren't really into that corporate thing. and number three, they really wanted to like be able to accumulate, hold on to, and spend their money. This is what they got back from these anonymous punch cards. Yeah. So Reagan then crafted his campaign to reflect those values. He basically said, look, I'm going to get out of the way. You know, we're not going to do a whole lot here. You know, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect your taxes, and I'm going to let you do what you do best, which is lead your life. And really, that was the message of his campaign. And it was the baby boomers who were actually really responsible for Reagan to get elected. They were very, right? Because, I mean, let's just put the voting hacking aside for just a moment. Right. If the baby boomers were really anti-Reagan and really anti-corporate and really anti-establishment, Jimmy Carter would have been a shoo-in. He would have been an absolute shoo-in, but he wasn't. So that says a lot about what happened to the boomers. In a lot of ways, the boomers became the thing in some ways that they hated the most. Right, but they'll never tell you that. They won't tell you that because they'll have, you know, their other kinds of hobbies, sidelines, ideals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. But so they're able to justify it in some ways. And don't get me wrong, I like boomers. I think I really do. They contributed a lot to like we wouldn't have like food the way we know it without a lot of these, you know, boomers who were part of the food explosion. Yeah. You know, in the West Coast, you know, and yeah, like Idell and Idell Sausage. He comes out of California, and Joyce Goldstein and all these people. Anyway, so that's who they were, and then they became kind of commodified, and they became a lot more conservative. And you look now, you know, who are the people that are really kind of speaking out against this so-called tyranny? Like John Voight. You know, John Voight is a baby boomer. Yeah, and you know, and he's taken on, you know, the system again. So they've done a real 180 in terms of, you know, where they were, what they were celebrating, which was, you know, kind of self-indulgent in a lot of ways. But hey, who knows? I mean, I was there, but I was young in the 60s. I wasn't of that age. And now they're like, hey, look, you know, you guys are fucking nuts. You know, we can't do this. We can't have this. So you're having people like sorry, I'm having a blank now. I think Giuliani's a boomer. He's too old. I think Giuliani's an older generation. But Trump technically is a boomer.
Yeah, he's right on the verge.
Yeah, Trump is a boomer. And Sidney Powell is a boomer as well. Okay. Yeah. No, Biden's not a boomer. Biden is in the same zip code as Klaus Schwab. Wrap your head around that. Like age-wise.
Oh, yeah, totally. Silent generation. Yeah. They're so it's so complex. It's so complex because what you're describing might be statistically the arc of the boomer generation. It might be, and then there's the people that I know in my life and things like that who might buck against that curve or reflect it perfectly. But you know, when I think about what the spring's going to look like, so let's say what my generation, as we're inheriting power, as we are taking power. Right now we're going to do with that power. There's what I hope for, and there's what's probable, you know. And when I think about what's probable, it's probably important to pay attention to the outwardly observable public sphere. You know, it's like, again, the AOCs, when you the cultural sensitivity trainings, the turning of every corporation into an activist organization, the policing of values of everybody, the ad hominem. So if you ever did anything wrong or said anything offensive in your life, you're ruined. These are what I'm seeing as being the mainline systems and institutions. It's a neo-puritanical type thing that we're instituting systems of enforcing that may have something to do with the sensibilities or spiritual fabric that the boomers brought about, of like old man GI, you know, screw you, old man, you know, again, kill the king, kill the king, kill the king. It's this obsession with kill the king, whereas rather than an artistic conflagration, our generation, my generation, is coming up with, unfortunately, authoritarian institutions to enforce conformity. And I don't like to say that, because I still hold out hope that it could be something different, you know, that the whole thing could be crushed. If we look at, like, for example, I would characterize the last generational cycle, the last constellation that we were in this place, was an institution of fascist norms. And if we're at and let's just say, to play devil's advocate, or for the sake of, hypothesis, that the boomer generation were the iconoclast with the fascist norm, rather than sycophants to that. I'm not saying I believe that, but let's just say that it's the case. The boomers were the iconoclast to the fascist norm. If that's truly the case, then we can have some hope that maybe the millennial generation will start to congeal institutions that are genuinely non-fascistic. But we just tend to be statolators. We tend to lean into that big state control, collectivist type thinking that gets me highly suspicious. If I start speaking about freedom, if I go to a party of millennials on average and start talking about freedom and individual rights, I'm not going to be the coolest guy in the room, I'll tell you that. The person who's talking about unity and the collective and collective rights and things like that, they're going to be the coolest person in the room. They're going to be who people are listening to. So those are the key words that millennials gravitate to. It's not individualism. And I find it strange, because if we're to look at the fourth turning type thing, you'd think that we would have adopted sensibilities of the idealists, the boomers, and that we'd maybe be coming up with institutions that are potentially more liberating, but they seem to be highly more authoritarian. I do have that could just be, again, the observable world that's crumbling. So it could be that the Netflixes, the Googles, the CNNs, the New York Timeses, the institutions of information are trying to coronate particular individuals among the millennial generation that are towing a fascist line, and that there really is an undercurrent of different institutions that will be implemented, which won't be quite as fascistic. I don't know. Certain institutions are crumbling. I mean, CNN's for sale, for example. Readership of the New York Times is down. There's certain things that seem to be crumbling in the internet and the YouTube and the BitChute and the Parler, and there's all these new kind of things coming up that seem to be the weeds between the sidewalk that are crumbling what is clearly an attempt to censor and keep down any grassroots type thinking. And so it could go either way. It could be a break with collectivism, or it could be a collectivism 2.0 as far as the spring that we see. But there's always the antithesis. You talked about thesis and antithesis, or you talked about hero and anti-hero. There's always heroes and anti-heroes within a generation. So if the boomers were the anti-hero to the GI generation, there were still heroes and anti-heroes of the boomer generation. So those who characterized the general zeitgeist and the public, and those who were completely opposite.
Well, the anti-hero was the hero. He was just a darker version of the hero, right? And he wasn't opposed to being a hero. It was the anti-hero is somebody like, Steve McQueen or Clint Eastwood, in that they all have to be moved in some ways into taking heroic action, even though their nature doesn't really correspond with that. Like Clint Eastwood is the anti-John Wayne. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the portrayal of his Western movies. So it's not that the anti-hero isn't a hero. It's just a different version of the hero. I think now what we're dealing with is going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation to some extent here, is that, to coin the Stranglers, there are no heroes anymore. Heroes aren't allowed. Now, maybe heroines could be allowed, but certainly not heroes. I think your generation, and I've taken some time to kind of dwell on this, and even astrologically, your generation is about decomposition. That's what you guys are here to do. You're here to break things down, and there's Scorpio, right? It's about transformation, and there's a beauty in that decomposition in some ways. So a lot of the previous order, a lot of the way that things have been done, it's like, we're not going to do it this way anymore. We're going to do it this way now. Okay. And if you don't agree with it, well, tough shit, because we agree with it. And that's just the final word on that. So I think there could be a better kind of distribution of how that decomposition takes place without the hardcore sort of mandates that are associated with it. Now, I think that's what you guys are here to do. You're here to break down some of these institutions that really need to be broken down in a lot of ways. Now, I think that the generations that are going to be the ones who will be part of the new spring is going to be Generation Z. These guys have Pluto and Sagittarius, and astrologically, anytime we get a generation where Pluto is the outer planet Pluto is in a fire sign, it is a time of creation, right? So when we look at the Pluto and Leo generation, those are the baby boomers. They're very, very creative, and even though the silent generation kind of sets the mold, it's the boomers that take it and create, what you were talking about, which is sort of the template of the world we're living in. You go back to the Pluto and Aries people, which is the previous fire sign. I mean, my God, you've got like major people like Westinghouse, and these are the people that are going to forge the elements and lay down the track theoretically for the modern world. So you're going to have the Pluto and Sagittarius generation, who are going to be much more philosophical, and they're the ones. Interesting enough, like I know I got Pluto and Sag kids that watch my show.
So what year does this start?
Right around 1996.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. And then they drop off around 2009, and then there's another generation that comes in post 2009, and that's the Pluto and Capricorn generation. Now they're the ones that are going to build a new world. That's how I see them. And we're right now, the oldest one is about 11 years old right now. Okay, so
my oldest daughter.
Yeah, and they're very interesting. These are very old soul, very wise kinds of kids, and I eyeball them, and they're interesting. They're very interesting. The Pluto and Sag kids, they're the ones that are going to say no, but they're not necessarily going to say yes to the thing that came before them either.
Oh, they won't. They're very interesting. Those are the kids I mentor.
Yeah.
The ones we're talking about, the Pluto Sag kids, the 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004 birthdays. And what's cool about them is, again, my generation is the authority for them. On the one hand, we're kind of their mentors. We're kind of big brothery.
Yeah.
Not in the 1984 sense, but like in the mentorship sense. But on the other, our overly zealous ways kind of turn them off. So when we come to them and say, you have to think this way, or you have to identify with your collective, or your XYZ characteristics, and you need to identify with that, and you need to speak from that perspective only, they're kind of like, old man, that sounds like some authoritative BS.
That's right. Yeah.
Back against it. We're like that kind of crotchety, puritanical kind of Karen, to them. So.
Yeah. So they're going to be interesting, and they're very philosophical. So the new philosophical grid will be anchored by that generation. And you guys are going to have an interesting dance with them. I will say that. And I'm glad you're in a position of mentorship, because you'll get to know them and you'll be able to, talk to them, mediate with them. But other people who are in your generation are going to have a very difficult time with them. And I've heard stories about school teachers who are millennials, and they have to deal with some of these kids, and they are shocked. Totally. They are aghast by what they come up with and what they say, which gives me actually a lot of hope in a lot of ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then these Pluto and Cap kids, they're going to come around and they're going to build a new world. They're going to be the ones that are going to really construct something interesting in a lot of ways. And I think we're going to get a great second wave here with our culture. And I believe that the spring is coming. It's not as far off as we think.
Yeah.
I think when Saturn and Neptune go into the sign of Aries, which is representative of the spring, we'll begin to feel that again. But between now and then, I'm just going to say it, I'm going to put it right out there, we're in a war. And if you don't understand that, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
We are in a war, and we are in a revolution. And the revolution now is like Pluto in Capricorn is getting ready to come back into the same position that it was when this country was theoretically started in 1776. So we're going to have our Pluto return. And what was going on during that time, right? There was a transformation of authority. There was a transformation of these figures that wanted to impose taxes upon us, right? And all the things that a small percentage of the population, some of the percentage would have gone along with it. Talk about statolatry. Oh no, we don't want a revolution. We like it. We like this thing. So now all of a sudden, what are we going to get? It's not King George. It's King Klaus, right? That's who we have now. It's like, fuck that.
Yeah.
We're not going to deal with that. So the revolution is on. It is happening. And if you are not aware or you're not paying attention, get with the program, because this thing is going to resolve itself eventually. And I think it's going to be Saturn Pisces. I'm sorry, Saturn Aries, Neptune Aries. To me, that's when some life and prana gets breathed back, or pneuma gets breathed back into this thing.
I'm just curious, when does that happen, Rob? When is that shift?
Right. So we're going to go through a Saturn cycle in Aquarius. That's for 3 years. So roughly 2021 to 2024, that's going to be Saturn in Aquarius. And then in 2024, we're going to have Saturn in Pisces for 3 years. Yeah. And so 2027 is when Saturn goes into Aries. And at that time, what's really interesting and very unusual in that Neptune and Saturn will be kind of shadowing each other during this phase. So one of the things that is kind of a hallmark of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, you go back to the Bolshevik Revolution, Saturn and Neptune were conjunct during that time. So we're having another Saturn-Neptune conjunction coming up here. But then following that, it'll be in a different sign, because Pisces just wants to kind of, blur everything and, wants this kind of collective miasma. And then when Saturn and Neptune come together in Aries, it'll be very different. It'll be very, very different. It'll be, sort of martial and either dissolving things that are overly martial and too hard and too strict, or redefining the nature of will as it relates to individual will and spiritual will. I think it's going to be a very interesting time. And then we get out to 2009. We're going to have Saturn in Taurus. We finally hit ground with Saturn, since we're leaving ground now with Saturn in Capricorn. But in Taurus, it's new ground, right? It's the first Earth sign. So we get to build something new during that phase. Okay. So anybody who's listening to this, hang in there. It's going to be okay. It doesn't take you off the hook, right? You just can't sit around. It's not going to take you off the hook. But this thing is going to work itself out. And we're going to have a better world, and we're going to have better, more informed people. And a lot of it will have to do with what we're going through now. And to your point, and just bringing this all the way back to this idea of initiation, a lot of people don't know what it's like to go through a really difficult social situation, right? Cultural situation. You talk to anybody from the Balkans, who've grown up in Bosnia or Serbia, they will tell you how hard life is. And they will tell you how much they value freedom. You talk to some of the Venezuelans living in Miami right now. Right. They'll tell you everything you need to know, right? Yeah. So maybe what we're going through now is important. Maybe what we're going through now, and the discomfort that we're going to feel, and the pain we're going to feel, and the compression we're going to feel, is the absolute best thing in some ways that we can have, so that we can figure this thing out and say never again. Really, truly never again.
That's a beautiful way of seeing it. I love the optimistic perspective, Rob. I think it's really important for me personally to have that. I'll say I vacillate back and forth between a more fatalistic kind of situation. I mean, I maintain control over my personal path. Say I'm not going to surrender to statolatry or these satanic impulses or totalitarianism. I'm going to stake out the devotion to freedom and truth and not forsake that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that observes that, man, yeah, this acquiescence is certainly discouraging that I see on a collective level. But it's really great to keep that bird's eye view and keep that encouragement up, because again, being defeated doesn't help anything.
Doesn't help at all. No. Yeah. And a lot of and a lot of people now have been really initiated into demoralization. So we're in a very deep demoralization phase, and almost coming into the normalization of demoralization. So we really owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the people that we really care about and have some investment in, right? Have, like the kids that you work with, like you have an investment in those kids. So in order for them to have anything to kind of latch onto, you have to have some level of optimism. You have to have some level of faith that things are going to work out in their favor. If not, you may as well just stay home, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, Jordan, and long overdue. Yeah.
It was awesome, Rob. I really appreciate it. It's good to talk to you.
Great to talk with you. So please, I'm going to leave a link to Jordan's YouTube page. It's right there. It's right there. Papi Aesthesia. Go subscribe. I mean, if you like this conversation, he brings it on a consistent basis. And I love the setting. You're kind of in this woodshed and this, black and white, and you're like in the South, every now and then you stomp your boots, and it's great. It's artistic and creative. So go check him out. You're welcome back anytime, and you take good care of yourself. Okay.
You too. Thank you.
All right. See you later.
See ya.
Right. How great was that, huh? Give it up. Jordan, bring it. Okay. So I got a whole thing on human design lined up, and I only planned to have Jordan on for an hour, but it's just too good to just keep in that 60-minute bucket. I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the human design into the Sunday night show, rather. I'm going to roll into the Sunday night. I know some of you here for the human design, but I bet you're not disappointed with what you got, okay? Because it is in the astrological territory, and I'm hoping that Sunday night I'll have a special guest, and I don't mind to let the cat out of the bag. So our gal Ani, our top gal with the winch with the wrench, has been in contact with Mr. Leo King, David Palmer, and David has agreed to come on the show. So I'm hoping Sunday night David can join me. That's an open invitation. David, if you're watching, you already know that. And so I'm hoping that this Sunday night it'll be me and David Palmer, also known as the Leo King, on the Sunday night show. And then I'm also going to bust out some human design. You can take a look at that. So a lot of good programming. Who needs fucking TV when you've got really good people? Like, you get Jordan Foltz on Fox News, he would make their fucking head spin. Okay, he would make their head spin. And how good would it be for him to have that message, right? And like, it would be amazing. It'd be absolutely amazing. But this is where the action is right now, whether it's YouTube or BitChute. I was watching Steve Bannon today. Holy shit. He was Steve Bannon. Look, my only beef with Steve Bannon at this point is that he's still holding on to this idea of like, this dangerous, virus that China let loose, turns China into the bad, whatever, he's got to hold on to that, pandemic thing. Like, drop the pandemic, Steve, and really, come to the party, listen to some of your guys in the studio, and, just that's all you got to do. But today, man, Steve Bannon was a flamethrower. He was just on fire. He was totally on fire. He laid into Dana Perino. Oh my God. Steve Bannon can bring it. You guys knew who this is, right? Here he is. The astrological cat is in the house. Yeah. I'm back in his zone. I am back in his zone. His tail, yeah, exactly. My tail only comes out under very specific situations. Remember that. Okay, so what Steve Bannon said? This is what I love about Steve Bannon. He said, all these people who are just, oh my God, Fox News, you're letting me down. Oh no. Grow up. It's a business, okay? They made a business decision. Grow up. Watch somebody else. Watch something else. Better yet, read a book. I love that shit. Hey, my man, Robert. What's going on, Robert? Good to see you. See you. Thermite walrus. That is not a thermite walrus. That is a cat vitar. You've heard of an avatar? That's a cat vitar right there. Okay. I'm gonna go. I'm out of here. I'll be back on Saturday night. I will do the human design Saturday night, or Sunday night. I keep saying Saturday. Sunday night, we'll do the human design stuff on Sunday night, and hopefully Mr. Leo King himself will be here, and that'll be great. In the meantime, stay the course, people. We're in it, okay? We're in it. And I don't know why, but, ever since, maybe I do know why, but ever since the COVID thing hit, and even with the election, and even with the Floyd stuff, it's like, I've been, I feel really alive. And I know for a lot of other people, it's like really scary, but I feel really alive. And I hope that there's enough going on, at the very least, that will shake you out and, ignite something inside of you where you can affirm and decree that, yes, indeed, you are alive, right? And you are alive, and what you're alive about with is actually worth living for and fighting for. Remember that. So use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to stay open what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Chatlandia. Here we go. Right. Catch you guys on Sunday night. Cheers.